Okay, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just a friendly reminder that this is being videotaped today. So for those of you who are able to join, thank you. For those of you who have to pop off early, we will have this recorded and available on social media, on Pedal the Cause social media website for future viewing. I am Stacy Ableys, the Director of Development at Pedal the Cause, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our panel on cancer and the COVID-19 vaccine, Getting the Facts. I'm joined today by an esteemed group of panelists from our community in health and wellness and pharmaceuticals, and I'd like to first invite them just to wave as I introduce them so that you all know kind of who is joining us today. First, and I'm just going to go by the way that I see you on my screen, I have Dr. Ryan Fields, who's the professor of surgery and the chief of surgical oncology at the Washington University School of Medicine. So did you wave, Dr. Fields? Okay, so Dr.
Yep,
Fields, he is also a Pedal the Cause funded researcher, a board member, and a team captain. Next on my screen, I have Dr. Rachel Presti. Hello, if you'll just wave for everyone. Hi, she is the medical director of infectious disease at the clinical research unit at the Washington University School of Medicine. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Last but not least, we have Mr. Justin Sperry, who is the senior director of project progression and analytical research and development with Pfizer. He is also a team captain for Pfizer Blue. And so thank you all for joining us today. We know that you have a very busy schedule, but got a lot of current events to talk about. So let's jump in and talk about it. For anyone who's joining us today, if you do have questions, this will be a fairly casual format, but feel free to add those to the chat panel, and the Pedal the Cause team and I will kind of keep an eye on questions throughout and try to interject them as appropriate, or we'll save for some Q&A at the end. But we do want you to be able to ask our esteemed group of panelists any questions that you might have that are appropriate for the topic today. So let's go ahead and get focused. Obviously, today's topic is very relevant for what we're dealing with, and that's COVID-19, the vaccine, some helpful facts, and how that impacts our cancer community, our pedal family, survivors, and the community at large. So let's start. The question on everyone's mind with the vaccine. Justin, a lot of new information coming out about the COVID-19 vaccine, especially specific to Pfizer. Can you help cover some of the basic questions for us? What's unique about Pfizer's vaccine, and why do you think it's important for people to know it now?
Sure. So first, I want to say thanks to you and Pedal the Cause for holding this panel. I think it's crucially important to have these conversations, especially regarding the importance of science during this time, not only with COVID-19, but with cancer. I think I'd like to just take a few minutes just to take a step back and think about kind of vaccines in general, and then I'll kind of hone in a little bit on the Pfizer vaccine. So, as many people know, there's many different types of vaccines used to prevent infections, and all of them really have the same goal. Their goal is to train your immune system to recognize and defend against infectious organisms, whether it be a virus or a bacteria. So traditional approaches that the industry has taken to vaccinate people have been more kind of weakened virus forms, or maybe pieces of the virus or pieces of the bacteria, and that's what we call subunits. And in general, the development of those approaches take a pretty significant period of time, because you have to make them almost look identical to how you would experience them, whether it's kind of an inactivated version of a virus or an actual subunit. So the mRNA approach, which was the approach that Pfizer took in this endeavor, along with Moderna, is different. And I think it's different, but also kind of uniquely suited to a pandemic, because the RNA approach is really truly designed to go fast. And so in order to discuss a little bit about RNA, I want to just take a little bit of a step back to discuss DNA, because that's really kind of where this all starts. And so when you think about your own DNA, or maybe even the coronavirus DNA, I want you to think about them as kind of a book of recipes, right? And so if I make every recipe in that book, especially of the coronavirus, I would get a coronavirus in return. And one of the recipes that we're really interested in, and because genetic sequencing has come to a really, you know, not necessarily easy, but very commonplace in the scientific community, we learned about the coronavirus very early on, about this time last year. And so we're very interested in a particular recipe of the coronavirus, and that's the spike protein. And this spike protein is what you all see when you see an image of the coronavirus on the news or on the internet. This is also the first thing that your immune system will see. And so what, in terms of recipe though, if you want to give a recipe to your friend, you don't rip your recipe out of your cookbook. You actually, at least in the olden days, used to pull out a 3x5 card and write it down and basically transcribe it. And so I want you to think about RNA as that recipe card. And so we know a lot about the coronavirus from the DNA. I want to make a specific set of instructions or a recipe card basically for that spike protein, and I want you to think of that as the RNA. And this is what we're providing in the vaccine. And so we can use our own cells in our body. Our cells make RNA every single day. They make it and break it down, and this is how our cells function. We're going to use that same machinery to make the spike protein of the coronavirus. And so once this spike protein is made by our cells, it gets presented in the same manner to our immune system, and that response forms. So I think it's also important to say that this vaccine, you know, doesn't cause COVID-19. It actually doesn't contain the virus itself. And it's there's a couple more things that I think are important about the Pfizer vaccine, and really all of the vaccines that have been given emergency use so far. Is that real quick, you know, the manufacturing process and testing that we do for each step, including the final product, they're done in really controlled manners. Our facilities, including the one in St. Louis, has been inspected by health authorities, and the vaccine is really well studied. So you might find a unique fun fact from this, that the vaccine really for the world's supply starts here in St. Louis, and this is where we make the DNA. We then ship that DNA to make our recipe card, to make the RNA in Boston, and then from Boston it goes to Michigan, where the final vaccine is formulated. And every single batch, actually, some of those vials come to St. Louis again. So really there's a full loop of St. Louis where it starts in St. Louis and ends in St. Louis. And we test every single batch to make sure things look good, and they are matched against our specifications that we filed with regulatory agencies, and we look at that batch and see how consistently it was made throughout the history and also the go forward production. So this technology, it might seem very new to people, but I want to assure people that, you know, our partner BioNTech has been developing this approach for over a decade. Moderna has as well. And although the technology as applied to the pandemic is new, the technology was not completely unknown a year ago when we started this work.
Thank you. And I love the St. Louis connection. I think we can all, you know, have some hometown pride knowing that we're not just helping our community, but we're helping our entire world to fight this pandemic. So that's exciting. So we talked about the meticulous way in which the vaccine itself is created and the recipe card. And I love that analogy because it's so easy to digest, especially any of us who like grew up cooking with our parents and had that recipe box that you would take out. It's just a great analogy. But so we talked about the meticulous way in which it's made, but can you talk a little bit about the effectiveness rate of the vaccines and kind of what you're already seeing now that the vaccine is starting to get into the hands of the general population and people are starting to be vaccinated?
Yeah, so the effectiveness has been really, really great so far. Our phase 3 clinical study, as many people have read, with roughly 44,000 people in it, we had a very high effectiveness rate, nearing 95%. And this effectiveness is measured by kind of severe disease, hospitalizations, deaths. So those things are prevented by taking our the 2-dose regimen for the vaccine. I think what's a good take home is we had a really broad population in the phase 3 trial, so it's pretty diverse, lots of different ages, and what we saw was a really consistent response in various ages and various ethnicities and various races. So it was a really broad and consistent response, and so this tells us that the effectiveness is really for all people.
And you hinted a little bit about the 2 doses, but can you tell us why it's important that, with Pfizer, it is a 2-dose process? Can you tell us why it's important that people actually get their second dose?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this is really how our clinical trial was designed and how we were going to monitor the participants that were in the trial. And so with the first dose, we obviously see an immune response, and it's a pretty effective response. But 21 days later, as part of the clinical trial design, is where we get that really enhanced response. And this was the basis of the data that was presented to the FDA for emergency use. So it's a combination of the safety data and the efficacy data, from all of those trial participants that assured the confidence from the FDA that this would be really worth the benefit and risk for emergency use authorization. So we're actually continuing to monitor our participants. In fact, many that started the phase 3 trial are getting their kind of 6-month checkups now. We'll continue to monitor those people for 1 year and 2 years after this, but we really aren't collecting information on a single dose at this point. And so it'd be difficult to study how long the response may occur, or what the long-term effect of that is. But at this point, our confidence is in the 2 doses. This is a similar approach that Moderna has taken, and there are other companies, obviously, that are doing single-dose approaches as well.
Well, I know we're going to move on to another topic, but we did get 2 questions specific to the vaccine. So I did want to try to answer those while we're kind of on this talking point as of now. So you did talk about when you get the vaccine that there is no live coronavirus in the vaccine. And so one of the questions that came directly from YouTube was, I know that you can't quote unquote get COVID when you get the vaccine, but why do you find that so many people are getting sick or fatigued, especially after the second vaccination?
Yeah, these are pretty common side effects, regardless of vaccines that you take, that are pretty common. We observed all of these side effects in our clinical trials, and those are summarized and presented to the FDA to ensure that there was the right safety profile for people. Again, what we're seeing in real distribution at this point, with millions and millions of people dosed, is very consistent with what we saw in our phase 3 trial. And I think it's just, everybody's going to respond a little differently, and I think it's just kind of a common reaction to an immune response.
Sure. And we did talk a little bit about the effective rate once you had been vaccinated. There was a question, I don't know if you have this data with you, but particular to our community, which is immunocompromised and impacted by cancer, do you have any data related to the efficacy for those who do have a current cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, so in our particular clinical protocol, those that were immunocompromised were actually excluded from the trial. We did have people that had cancer before and that were in remission, that were a part of the trial. We are adding additional what we call subpopulations to the trial as we go. So pregnant mothers are recent in the news, younger children is recently in the news. And we do have plans to look at immunocompromised population, but we haven't started that yet. And I think for those that do have cancer, I think it's a really important conversation to have with your doctor or oncologist to see whether or not the benefit risk of getting vaccinated is important.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have more vaccination questions along the way, but at this point in time, we're going to shift our focus a little bit and talk with Dr. Presti about implications for the community at large. Now that we are starting to see the vaccination moving down the tiers into some of the general population, what do you expect or hope to see as more people get their first and second vaccinations over these spring and summer months?
Yeah, actually, do you mind if I add a little bit to the two questions?
Please.
So just because we see patients all the time and get these questions, one of the things to keep in mind about getting sick after a vaccine is that a lot of feeling sick is actually your immune response to an infection. And so that feeling of feeling sick or feeling fatigued is actually an indication that your immune system is active, and that's sort of what it feels like. But since there's no actual infection going on, you're not suffering the consequences of the infection. And the one thing that's kind of remarkable about a lot of these vaccines is you feel sick, and then when you feel better, you feel completely better. So there's not lingering kind of effects because there's no replicating virus that is part of the vaccines. So what I tell people, and it makes people feel better about some of the symptoms and side effects that they get from vaccines, is that is just an indication that your immune system is responding to the vaccine. That doesn't mean that if you don't have symptoms that you're not getting a good immune response, but I think that's sort of helpful to think of it that way, and that because there's not an ongoing infection, those symptoms shouldn't last more than a couple of days. And then the effectiveness for cancer patients, again, yeah, I don't think we know that for any of the vaccines. There are ongoing studies, I think even ongoing at Washington University. I don't know as much, and maybe Dr. Fields can comment about whether or not they have studies in cancer patients per se, but they are studying what happens to people who are getting the vaccine who are have immune compromised conditions. So they're looking at the immune responses after people get a clinically available vaccine to see what the immune responses look like in that setting. I think the one thing that is important to remember is even though we don't know the effectiveness, we don't have data, but there's no reason to expect that any of these vaccines can cause infections, and so the safety of them is not really a concern in people who don't have immune compromise. It's just the effectiveness. So I think what we expect to see as more people get their first and second vaccinations is actually what they saw in Israel, which is that the number of infections actually dramatically decrease. So we don't completely prevent infection, we prevent symptomatic infection and severe disease. And so what you see is those rates going down. But it is true that even though we don't completely prevent infection, we do prevent some infections. So there is protection against some transmission with all of these vaccines. And so it's what we expect to see is that we would see less people getting sick. And we hear a lot about herd immunity. What herd immunity basically means is enough people have immunity, enough people are protected from getting sick from the virus that it breaks the cycle. So basically, if you've got one person in a group of 10 and all 10 of them are susceptible, or one sick person and a group of 10 other people, if they're all susceptible to getting infected, you could see that all 10 could get infected, and then they could spread that to more people that they come into contact with. If you had 9 of those folks already vaccinated, then only one person is capable of sort of spreading the infection further. And so the more people you have vaccinated, and the more people you have protected against getting infected and then subsequently spreading that to other people, the less the virus is able to replicate in the community. And so that's what we really need right now, is to sort of break this cycle so that we can decrease the number of infections in the community, so that we can start seeing decreases in the pandemic and start getting back to a point where it is safer for people to be actually interacting with each other in the community. It's particularly important in the cancer community because there are people in the cancer community who aren't going to be able to make a good immune response to the vaccines. But if everyone around them is immune, that will protect them. And so it's important in this community especially that we get to a point where enough folks are vaccinated that the community is protected.
Absolutely. And when you speak to an immunocompromised community, even if you're vaccinated, should you be wearing a mask and should you be practicing social distancing? This seems like an obvious question, but I feel like it's something that we need to cover.
Right. And I think the messaging on this is a little subtle. So, I think we definitely need people to still wear masks, and we definitely need people to still socially distance. That is to protect the community. That is to basically use every sort of tool that we have in our armamentarium to fight the pandemic. So, but that doesn't mean the vaccines do protect you, and but they don't completely eliminate the possibility that you might have an asymptomatic infection that you could spread to someone else. So it's really important to keep wearing masks so that we can stop the spread. So until we get to a point where the community doesn't have the current sort of very high level of spread, we need to do everything we can. It's a belt and suspenders approach at this point. And when we get to a point where there isn't as much circulating virus, that's, I think, when we can get to the point where we can start talking about what is the new normal that we're going to get to.
Absolutely. And you touched on it a little bit. And Dr. Fields, I want to shift to you a little bit, and speaking about, our immunocompromised community and those who are cancer patients or caregivers of our Siteman patients and in the community. What considerations are important when it comes to getting vaccinated yourself, staying safe, once vaccinations are rolled out, and just what you're maybe bringing into the home or bringing near someone who's undergoing treatment currently for a cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think, again, thanks for organizing this fantastic forum with great expertise and people who have, helped design this vaccine or are in charge of giving it at the highest levels. I think a couple of themes I would touch on. The first is, if you're a cancer patient undergoing active treatment, then any decision you make for your health, whether it's related to a new medication you're starting or getting the vaccine, should be run through your primary oncologist, whoever your treating team is. And that's because there may be implications to getting the vaccine if you're about to have a surgical procedure or about to start chemotherapy that are particular to your cancer care. There are particular types of cancer therapy like chemotherapy, traditional chemotherapy, that does suppress the immune system. And then there are others, some of these targeted therapies. There was a question on PARP inhibitors that don't really affect the immune system where we would expect it to affect this particular vaccine. There are a lot of large studies going on in cancer patients looking at the effectiveness by measuring antibody titers and efficacy, and those are ongoing. But in general, there's not a real firm recommendation to say you shouldn't get the vaccine if you're undergoing treatment X, Y, or Z, because the vaccine seems to be effective in almost all populations. Because realize your oncologist is probably going to hold your chemotherapy or your treatment if your immune system is really suppressed at any given time. The second thing I'll think is we got to sort of separate two patients undergoing active treatment, those that are kind of in what I'd call survivorship mode. You had cancer, but you haven't seen treatment in say 3-6 months even. Pretty much, unless you've had a long-term sort of side effect, your immune system should be ramped up enough to respond to this vaccine, just like any other person. So I think it would be strongly encouraged to get the vaccine if and when it's available, kind of when your time comes up. And I think that's really important too, also to coordinate with your treating team. And the other thing I'd mention that I think is really, really important to think about, just in general related to the vaccine, especially with the variants, is, these variants come up because the virus is still spreading and actively has a breeding ground to mutate. So if we can nip that in the bud with social distancing and vaccination, the variants by definition aren't going to keep coming because they don't have the ability to spread and mutate and sort of take hold. So the quote original vaccine is going to be effective in that. Social distancing is going to be effective in that. And as I'm sure Justin can touch upon, this technology is perfectly suited to respond and change a bit when a new variant comes out if needed, so that you can have a booster or a second dose or whatever it is to fight that. So even more reason to get vaccinated. Don't think, oh, these variants are coming, so why should I get vaccinated? It's not going to work. This is much different than the seasonal flu shot. And then keep wearing the mask and keep socially distancing to prevent it from taking hold again.
Absolutely. And as you all have been speaking, some of the questions have been, I'm kind of seeing a general theme. It's about, immunity, like how long do you have the antibodies and the immunities, and how do those react to the various variants that we're seeing? Someone mentioned New York, someone mentioned South Africa. How does the body respond to that once it's been vaccinated?
Yeah, so I guess I can provide a little bit of insight of kind of what we're thinking right now. Obviously, with our initial effectiveness at 95%, we feel pretty confident in the immune response that we're building in our bodies. But I think what we've done is continue to monitor the situation. We've taken some laboratory, or what we call in vitro experiments, where we look at some of the variants like the UK variant and the South African variant, and we're not really seeing in those experiments a significant decrease in protection, which from an in vitro level point of view is really good. I think, to be proactive though, and Dr. Fields mentioned this as well, is that one of the benefits of this technology is the ability to adapt. And, we were interested in the technology because we wanted to make a more accurate flu vaccine. That's why we've been partnering with BioNTech over the last several years on this technology. But with respect to variants, we're taking two different approaches right now. We are and have started a small trial where we will look at a booster of the same vaccine. Basically, if somebody received a 2-dose regimen approximately 6 months to 12 months ago, that we would give them a booster to kind of see what kind of immune response occurs with that. In addition, we are also preparing and having active discussions with regulatory agencies on making or adapting our RNA to be more representative of the variant, let's say the South African variant, for example. And so we'll run kind of a head-to-head, side-by-side comparison of what does a booster look like and what additional protection does it have. And we'll continue to work on this, not only now, but in the next coming months.
So you talked a little bit, all of you, about the science and the technology behind it. And certainly it's not new to you all, but for the general public, it is relatively new. And it's very exciting to see this kind of transdisciplinary approach. How do you think that applies to future treatments and future care, whether it's other infectious diseases or cancer itself, and how we are treating patients? And, ultimately the hope is vaccinating, patients against certain diseases and cancers. So what kind of do you see on the horizon in the future for medicine and how we are treating patients?
Well, it's even already here on the cancer space. We have an open clinical trial that's testing an mRNA vaccine in melanoma. And that trial obviously predated the pandemic in terms of its development. So this technology will certainly be applicable to what's an active area of research of cancer vaccine strategies. So it's here for that, and I'll let Justin and Rachel can comment on the infectious disease and how it can relate to other vaccine technology. But in the cancer space, it's here and going to be very powerful for all the reasons we mentioned. It's adaptable and scalable and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll just say and reiterate kind of what I said before. We were interested in this technology to make a more accurate and effective flu vaccine. As many of you know, the accuracy could be good one year, might not be so great the next year. But if we could respond to a highly circulating strain of the flu, let's say in less than a few months, this would be highly beneficial from a flu vaccine point of view. I think it also prepares us for, and let's hope that we don't have another pandemic soon, but to be able to produce this on the billions of doses scale, you need to have an infrastructure, an end-to-end infrastructure to do that. And I think many companies now have invested in that, and we will have the ability to scale this if needed. And as Dr. Fields said, BioNTech, our partner, has many cancer vaccines in their portfolio. They've been developing this for some time. There's an opportunity to look at rare diseases as well. And so I think there's a lot of promise, not only in the therapeutic approach, but thinking about the process in order that we went through to go from not even a year ago to an approved product. So if we step away from vaccines for a moment and think about, maybe there's a therapy that's coming through a pipeline that we could do in a more continuous fashion that could help patients. And so that kind of partnership with regulatory agencies, our ability to manufacture and monitor clinical trials continuously may provide an opportunity to get these kind of breakthroughs to patients faster. And we're actively looking at those as well.
I think that's definitely true. Also, sort of on the study side, and we didn't talk extensively about the phase 3 studies, but a lot of the infrastructure that was put into place to actually conduct phase 3 studies at the level that they've been conducted. So, most vaccines that get developed, for example, the Shingrix vaccine that a lot of folks have gotten, had 15,000 people in their phase 3 study, and it took a couple of years to enroll, and it took a couple more years to actually get all the data, which means it's even more remarkable that, that we were able to mobilize to get 45,000 people enrolled on the Pfizer study or the Janssen study and 30,000 people enrolled on the Moderna study in really only a couple of months. So making people aware of the opportunities to participate in clinical trials, being able to conduct those trials in an efficient and safe way, and recognizing that, we actually, in the setting where we need to, you can actually collect the information that you need to have something ready in a pandemic situation or in a medical emergency situation in a much shorter period of time than we've done in the past, without actually sacrificing any of the regulatory or safety parameters that we would always have in place for clinical trials.
Really exciting time, I think, for all of us. I mean, just from a novice perspective, what we're hearing, some of us for the first time, makes us really hopeful for whatever kind of disease that we might have or a loved one might have, especially for those in the Petal family and those with a cancer diagnosis. I think it's really exciting to learn what opportunities might be available and therapies that might be available to those we care for in the future. So going back to the cancer lens, because clearly we are getting a lot of cancer related questions. We did have a question related to the phase approach for vaccines, and for those who are considered our living proof, who are cancer thrivers but no longer in active treatment. They had some questions related to the phased approach for vaccination and where they are considered, if they are considered tier 1B or tier 2. I would probably direct them to reach out to their physician directly, as well as their health department in the jurisdiction in which they live. But I would also ask for any insight that you all might have to share about where people fall within the state of Missouri and the tiered vaccination approach.
That's what I mean. History of a cancer diagnosis isn't per se put somebody in a higher risk category for complications from COVID, like heart disease and diabetes and lung disease, things that would sort of bump you up a tier outside of just age. That being said, some people have had long-term complications, say cardiovascular from being on particular types of chemotherapy or lung damage, things like that, that are related to their cancer diagnosis that would push them up to a different tier. So I think generally it's going to be the higher risk things in age that are going to drive it rather than a cancer diagnosis per se. It is encouraging, I think now, especially with a third vaccine coming out, that I think the numbers are ramping up even quicker and that all the people down sort of the tiers are going to be eligible and getting shots in the arm here sooner than later.
Do any of you have a thought on the time frame on when you can see the majority of our community eligible for vaccinations? Justin, that might fall to you.
Yeah, so I can definitely talk a little bit about kind of how many doses that we're making and kind of what our timetable is. So as of about the middle of February, we delivered approximately 40 million doses to the US and about 100 million doses worldwide. By the end of March, our target is to have 120 million doses in the US, and by the end of by May timeframe, 200 million doses in the US. And so our contract right now is 300 million by the end of July, and so that would be 150 million people with the ability to be dosed by the end of summer. And so I think what we're doing, all of our doses that we manufacture, because we're under an emergency use authorization, go direct to the US government. And then the US government then works with our state and local officials to distribute vaccines as they get them. On our side, we're doing, we're doubling our batch sizes and really trying to increase the throughput and efficiency of our production to a clip of making, over 100 million doses a month for our worldwide commitments at this point. So it is coming, and we're hoping that many people have opportunities to get vaccinated by the summer timeframe.
Well, thank you. And to that end, the follow-up questions would be, and I can see Dr. Fields typing some of these responses as we speak, but I think we should share with the audience. Some of the questions that are coming in are about kind of a world post-vaccination and seeing elderly relatives and or going to restaurants, going out and being social. I know, Dr. Presti, you spoke a little bit about, herd immunity and social distancing and the importance of wearing masks, but I mean, a lot of people want to get back to quote unquote normal, whatever that looks like, which is understandable. But, we're definitely seeing a lot of questions about what's safe indoors versus outdoors. Thankfully, we're moving towards warmer weather, which pushes us outside. But can you all talk about just kind of, again, reiterate safe practices and talk about seeing those and getting back out in the world once you are vaccinated and what that means potentially for others who maybe are not yet vaccinated? I just want to reiterate that because we see it kind of coming through over and over again. So
yeah, I think this is
punt that to Dr. Presti.
Yeah, I think none of us have a crystal ball, and scientists in general tend to be kind of cautious. And so, I think the concern that's still out there has to do with the variants and what exactly is going to happen with those. And so if we can get the numbers down fast enough that we don't see more circulating variants and we start to see the numbers go down, I think we can think about getting to a more normal kind of interaction in the summer. And especially if you think about doing those things that are safe to do, which is to be outside and interact with your family and friends and so on, in a manner where you're not all enclosed in a small space and all sharing the same air, that's a safer thing to do. And so I think that's part of why we're thinking the summer is likely to be a more normal summer than definitely than last summer. I think the other thing is, you just have to keep listening to the health, the public health experts and the scientists about what's actually going on the ground. But these viruses are winter viruses, and so we would expect that in addition to wearing masks and social distancing in the winter time and getting vaccinated, that the numbers would be going down already potentially in the summer. And that's sort of what we saw last summer. That being said, when more people have some level of immunity, this can be more of your common cold virus. It's still going to be high risk for certain populations, just like the flu is high risk for populations. And so we want to continue to protect people. I think that means that those habits you've gotten into about washing your hands and covering your mouth when you cough or you sneeze, those are things to keep regardless. We had hardly any influenza this year, and there are probably practices that people have taken up this year that we might want to think about actually becoming the new normal.
Anyone else want to chime in, Dr. Fields?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all those sentiments of, and just sort of magnify the fact that if we sort of look at, well, when can we get back to normal? I think we have the opportunity now to really we've got our grasp around this virus, and to really push it across, call it the finish line if you want to, when we can get back to normal, is going to really be even more containment to not let these variants spread. I think it's become very clear that it's just very safe to be outdoors, and now the weather's getting nice. So, be outdoors with friends and family and gatherings. That doesn't mean packed together in a, open air concert where you're right on top of people where there really is no extra air to breathe, but, going out in the park and having a picnic and eating outdoors at restaurants and things is probably very, very, very safe. Indoors is still, I think, a little tricky because you just don't know all these other people that are there. You don't know who's been vaccinated, who's not, who's been, social distancing and who's not. So, I think, can you gather indoors with friends and family who have been vaccinated and that sort of thing? That's probably a lot safer, of course, because the population that's more limited, but probably still not, of course, as safe as being outdoors. And then I think the $1 million question, right, are kids, because they're going to be kind of last to get vaccinated, but they're probably also the lowest risk category. So, somebody had asked a question in the chat, can I, if I'm vaccinated, my spouse is vaccinated, our grandparents are vaccinated, can we take our kids and all go visit? And the answer is probably with some degree of risk benefit, yes. But there's still that wild card of, well, what about the kids? I think it's and I think, of course, Justin and Rachel can speak to some of the trials that are just really getting off the ground or will have results relatively soon for the kids. But even this summer may look normal without all the kids being vaccinated, because it's probably just looks safe.
Yeah, I'll just say as well, I picture this as kind of like a dimmer switch, and that we're gradually turning the light up as vaccines roll out, or we get into warmer temperatures. And so getting a vaccine is not a light switch where things turn on and off very quickly. Think of it as a dimmer where we're all together going to gradually come out of this as the rollout continues and people continue to remain safe and practice all the normal practices. And just, I guess, separately going on with the kids, our phase 3 trial enrolled actually 12 to 15-year-olds. There's over 2,000 kids enrolled in that trial, and they're actively being studied at the moment. And then we're getting ready. In order to vaccinate children, we have to kind of do this step-down approach with the FDA, where we do kind of an age group. Once that looks good, then we go on to the next age group. So our pediatric study for 5 to 11-year-olds will begin within the next month or so as well. So we'll gradually, as we get safety data for younger populations, we'll be able to expand that trial to younger kids.
So you kind of got all of us excited. So I am going to ask you and I'd love to hear from all of you, what is the most exciting thing about the COVID-19 vaccines that are out right now? Whether it's statistics, whether it's, good community feeling, like what excites you, and what are you seeing and what are you hearing from your colleagues in the community about, what's next for the coronavirus and for, kind of getting back to whatever this normal looks like. So Dr. Presti, I'm going to start with you.
I think what's amazing is that they all seem like they worked, and there was a lot of work going on for the last year, and it's really a remarkable thing, the extent to which everyone could come together, the community could come together, the companies could come together, the clinical trialists and everyone, and actually get really a result that I think in our wildest dreams we didn't really expect to see a 95% efficacy vaccine out and available in less than a year. So I don't know if I stole everyone else's thunder, but that's what's exciting to me. So.
Well, let's find out. Justin, I'm gonna let you go last. Dr. Fields, I'm gonna punt to you.
I mean, I would say in a good way, this whole process, it doesn't lean to the left or the right. It's not a political issue. And what it's really made me smile is just to see how the human drive and passion come together this wasn't one person or one lab. This was really the world coming together and sharing data and information to do this. Was it perfect? No, of course not. But as soon as a problem or a bottleneck was identified in this vaccine development process, it was overcome with ingenuity and spirit and hard work and drive and that sort of thing. I mean, I wasn't alive at the time, but I've read a lot of books on it, and it's sort of a topic of interest of mine with the space race. And I mean, when it was sort of challenged, let's go to the moon, and that was sort of thought to be an impossible goal within that time frame. I mean, this is like that magnified, and through all this unbelievable ingenuity and application of technology, it's become a reality. And so it's been about a year, right, since all this happened, and we're already have several effective vaccines and a light at the end of the tunnel. So in the grand scheme of things, I mean, how will we look back on this 20 years from now? We'll tell stories to our kids and grandkids about how this incredible success story, I think, is going to be the end chapter in the epilogue.
Well, Justin, I thought it'd only be fair to, end this with our spokesperson from one of the manufacturers of a current vaccine. So what, Justin, is the most exciting thing for you from, whether it's a Pfizer perspective, a personal perspective, what's so exciting for you to see in regards to the rollout of this COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, so I'll give kind of both perspectives. To me, I think just personally, and I see it as kind of hope is around the corner. I see it as, many people have suffered, too many people have died, businesses have suffered, communities have suffered. And to me, I see it as a ray of hope for everyone, regardless of country, origin, race, age, or whatever. As Dr. Fields said, this was a highly concerted effort. This was not a miracle. When I think of a miracle, miracles happen kind of unexpectedly. And I hope that the message from a scientist point of view and from my perspective is that this was very deliberate. It was a highly orchestrated, done with a lot of passion and grit. I literally didn't have a single person on my team not raise their hand when I said who wants to work on the vaccine. And that's the kind of, energy that you want. People worked around the clock to get this done, both European time and US time, literally 7 days a week. And, I guess from a scientist in the pharmaceutical industry, we could work our entire careers on medicines and not see potentially a medicine getting to help someone. And I think that's ultimately our goal as we come out of our training at universities. We hope to work for a pharmaceutical company that's going to make a difference to a patient, whether it's a cancer patient or somebody suffering from inflammation. But I think, for me, I think we're going to talk about this pandemic for years or decades potentially. And, it's exciting to say that even my small little role and the role that my team played and our organization played and our leadership played to really, truly drive this over the finish line has been pretty amazing. So Dr. Fields, again, used an analogy that I've used a lot in terms of the moonshot. The space race was huge for our country and the world. Dr. Fields himself is involved in a moonshot for cancer, and Pedal the Cause is playing a huge role in that as well. And this was our moonshot, and maybe we landed on the moon, but maybe we're going to keep going and apply this technology to things outside of pandemics. And so maybe we're going a little bit beyond the moon, but it's an incredibly proud moment. And I hope in small ways that we get the community to trust the science that's behind it so that we can move forward as a society.
Well, I don't know how else better to end this panel than on that. So again, I would like to thank, and we're cutting in close on 1 o'clock, so it's perfect timing for us to do some wrap up. I'd like to first and foremost thank everyone who's joining us today. We had a lot of interest on YouTube, on our Zoom, as well as Facebook Lives. And again, for anyone who can join us live, this will be available in Evergreen so people can watch it later. But I do want to thank our panelists first, Dr. Rachel Presti, Dr. Ryan Fields, and Dr. Justin Sperry from Pfizer. Thank you so much for being here. Pedal the Cause obviously finds the value in funding innovative cancer research. We believe in science. We know how important it is for the future of our community and for the health and betterment of the health of all of us. So whether we're talking cancer, infectious disease, or pharmaceuticals and implementation at all, I just want to thank you all for being here today. From a Pedal the Cause perspective, just want to let everyone know that our next, we will be doing a series of panel discussions. Our next will be on May 18th, where we'll be discussing part of what we talked about today, which is safe social interactions over the summer months as we'll be approaching the end of school and summer break. I'm sure we'll have a lot of new information to share about the coronavirus, where we are with the vaccine, and the implementation of various new vaccines in the community, as well as just efficacy numbers as well. Another Pedal reminder, registrations for Pedal the Cause 2021 will open, it's no joke, on April 1st. So we're excited for that. And as everyone has alluded to, it's safe to ride your bikes outside, be outside. No better plug for Pedal the Cause than that. And for more information about Pedal the Cause, and our efforts to create a world about cancer, you can visit our website at pedalthecause.org. Thank you all for joining us today. Be safe, be smart, wear a mask, wash your hands, use the hand sanitizer that's everywhere, and be good to one another. And thank you all for joining us today. And we hope you're safe and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.